Hi everyone, my name is Yvonne Aftana and my partner is Vanessa Rathan, and we will be going over the Chapter 12 Cybersecurity and Computer Fraud. Now, moving on to the risk related to information security and systems integrity. Now, important information and IT assets are exposed to risk and attacks from internal parties such as disgruntled employees and external parties such as hackers and competitors. Some of the common information security risk and attacks include virus, a program that spreads by attaching itself to other files or programs and replicates; a worm, a self-replicating program that spreads to networks on its own; a Trojan horse, a harmful program that looks helpful but secretly causes damage; spyware, software that secretly collects information from users without their knowledge; and lastly, spoofing, a sending a message that looks like it's from a different source. Moving to encryption and authentication. Now, encryption is using a algorithmic scheme to encode plain text into non-readable form and has three main factors, which are the key length encryption algorithm and key management. Now, the two encryption algorithms are the symmetric and asymmetric key encryption. Now, the symmetric key encryption is when both the sender and receiver use the same key to encrypt and decrypt messages. Now, the asymmetric key encryption is when you are trying to transmit confidential information. In this instance, a sender would use the receiver's public key to encrypt the message, and the receiver uses their own private key for decryption. Now, an authentication is a process that establishes the origin of information or determines the identity of a user, process, or device. And authentication can be achieved for electronic transaction using asymmetric key encryption. Now, the image on the right shows how the authentication process works, where the sender would send a challenge message to a receiver, and this receiver would use their own private key to encrypt the challenge message, and then send it back to the sender. And then when the sender receives the message, they would decrypt it with their own with the receiver's public key, and if it goes through, this would prove that that person is authenticated. Moving on to computer fraud and misuse of AIS and corresponding risk mitigation techniques. Now, computer fraud is using a computer to deceive, manipulate, or steal information for personal or financial gain. Some risk mitigation techniques we can use are using encryptions, authentication, and regular audits. Using an encryption protects sensitive data to prevent any unauthorized access. User authentication allows only authorized users to access systems. And then regular audits can be done periodically to identify and address any weak points. Now, misuse of AIS occurs when individuals exploit the system for personal gain or to cause harm. Some risk mitigation techniques are using access controls, segregation of duties, and employee training. With access controls, you could restrict system access to authorized personnel only and use role based access control to ensure users only access the information they need. Dividing responsibilities among different employees ensures no one person has control over all aspects of a financial transaction. And lastly, with employee training, training employees to recognize and report fraud or misuse attempts can encourage ethical behavior and prevent fraud or misuse from occurring. Lastly, the vulnerabilities and how to manage and assess them. Now, vulnerability is defined as the characteristic of IT resources that can be exploited by a threat to cause harm. Now, it is categorized by where it exists. Now, these categories are within a physical IT environment, within an information system, or within the processes of IT operations. Now, there are two prerequisites for vulnerability management. The first prerequisite is a firm should determine the main objectives of its vulnerability management because the firm's resource for managing vulnerabilities is limited. Now, a primary purpose of vulnerability management could be to comply with applicable laws, regulations, and standards. Now, the second prerequisite is a firm should assign roles and responsibilities for vulnerability management. Now, management may designate a team to be responsible for developing and implementing the vulnerability management program. It's important to note that management's commitment and support are critical success factors when assigning roles and responsibilities. Now, the main components of vulnerability management assessment are identification, assessment, remediation, and maintenance. Identification involves finding security weaknesses in systems through scans or manual checks. Assessment involves evaluating the risk and impact of the vulnerabilities to decide which ones need urgent attention. And remediation is fixing the identified vulnerabilities by applying patches, updates, or reconfiguring systems. And lastly, maintenance is continuously monitoring systems for new vulnerabilities, ensuring fixes remain effective and keeping everything up to date. And I'll be passing it on to Vanessa.
Half a day, everyone. My name is Vanessa, and I'll be continuing the second half of this presentation. So, for learning Objective 12-5, this looks at issues in system availability. It's important that data is available at all times, or at least when the data is needed, because even a short period of system downtime can create a loss in sales and a loss in the provider's trust. With this, the following key terms were given. An uninterruptible power supply is a device using battery power that allows a system to operate long enough to back up critical data and to shut down properly during the loss of power. Fault tolerance is a redundant unit providing a system the ability to continue functioning when part of the system fails. Many firms have a redundant array of independent drives or RAID so that if one drive fails, important data can be accessed from another disk. Good alternatives to backing up data and applications are virtualization and cloud computing. Virtualization uses various methods to create a virtual version of a hardware platform, storage device, or network resources. If a server hosting a virtual machine fails, the virtual machine can be installed to another redundant server. Cloud computing uses redundant servers in multiple locations to host virtual machines. With this, a service model with a third party provider offers computing resources such as hardware and software applications to cloud users over the internet. As the cloud users share the resources with other user companies, the cloud bearer has the responsibility for managing and maintaining resources. The user company should evaluate the provider's credibility, controls, and the system and network security, and the user company should also review the Service Organization Control (SOC) report from the cloud provider before signing the service agreement. Learning Objective 12-6 looks at concepts and issues in systems and organization controls or SOC reporting. The SOC reports, SOC1, focuses on the service provider's internal controls relevant to the user company's financial reporting. It's for auditors and management of the user company, which reports on fairness of the management's description of service organization system and the sustainability of the control designs to reaching objectives. Type 1 of SOC1 reports a specified date, while Type 2 is throughout a specified period. For SOC2, this examines security, availability, processing integrity, and confidentiality or privacy. This is for management of a service organization, regulators, and others. It's to assess governance, risk management, and compliance programs, also to offer due diligence and oversight. And this reports on fairness of the management description of services of the organization system and the sustainability of the control designs to reaching objectives. Type 1 of SOC2 reports a specified date, while Type 2 is throughout a specified period. SOC3 reports are easy to read by the general public. It summarizes security, availability, processing integrity, and confidentiality or privacy. It's for users with a need for confidence in the service organization's controls, and it gives a general understanding, and it's for marketing purposes. Learning Objective 12-7 looks at the importance of disaster recovery and business continuity. It's important for firms to have a plan to recover and continue operations from disaster events such as tsunamis or tornadoes. Disaster recovery planning, or DRP, is a process that identifies significant events that may threaten the firm's operations and outlines steps to ensure that the firm will resume operations when the event occurs. This considers key personnel, resources, IT infrastructure, and applications. And with this, DRP should also be tested periodically to find weaknesses and improvements. Another term is the Business Continuity Management (BCM), which are activities required to keep a firm running during a period of interruption of normal operations. The International Organization and Standardization (ISO 22301) is the commonly accepted standard that establishes process, principles, and terminology of continuity management for business and IT functions. It gives a plan to establish, implement, operate, monitor, and improve the BCMS, and it includes understanding the firm and identifying risks, analyzing the business impact of the risks, determining the BCM strategy and developing plans, and testing, maintaining, and improving the practices. So this concludes our presentation of cybersecurity and computer fraud.